Loki is back.
Ego de futuris adveni.
And he's speaking Latin. How is his Latin? Let's find out together. I'm Luke, and this is polýMATHY. Loki, along with Owen Wilson,
Wow.
in the second episode of the new Disney Plus series,
You make even the end of the world sound boring. Listen.
are in Pompeii shortly before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And Loki is up to his old tricks.
Go! Can you make bird noises? Bird noises. Mihi nomen est Loki.
He says, mihi nomen est Loki, and this is great. This is exactly the idiomatic expression to say, to me, the name is whatever it is. That's how we say that. For example, mihi nomen est Lucius. If you want to learn more about conversational Latin idioms, then you should check out my series Learn Latin Live on my other channel, Scorpio Martianus, where I make content exclusively in Latin and ancient Greek.
Wow. Praefectus concilii ad tempus mutandem.
Praefectus concilii ad tempus mutandum. Praefectus is a term for an officer, whether a military officer or some other kind of agent. Translating something like time variance authority, which barely makes sense in English, as is true of many other official terms. Concilium ad tempus mutandum is a very fine way to translate this into reasonably clear Latin. Literally, it's the council for the changing of time. Here we have the gerundive mutandum, an adjective which says whatever thing it's describing, in this case tempus, is to be changed. So literally, it actually means the council for the changing of time, which is nice and I think fits with Loki's character, that he is putting into this very authority an idea that he wants to change or experiment with changing the timeline, even though the English term doesn't necessarily suggest that.
Praefectus concilii ad tempus mutandem.
The actor is British, so of course he has a little bit of a British accent when he speaks. That's fine. The character is, of course, not a native Latin speaker, so whatever accent he would happen to have in this situation is perfectly acceptable for me. That said, Tom Hiddleston's pronunciation is very good. He gets pretty much everything right, including, for the most part, the long vowels. Yes, those sacred, phonemic long vowels, the thing I care so much about.
Praefectus concilii ad tempus mutandem.
In the line about praefectus concilii ad tempus mutandum, there's no we are, which is in the English translation. And I think that the original was actually mihi nomen est Loki praefectus concilii ad tempus mutandum, that was actually the original complete sentence. I am Loki, an officer, singular, not plural, of the time variance authority. This is, of course, why phonemic long vowels are so important, because the difference between praefectus and praefectus is the difference between singular and plural. That said, in Latin, we may frequently omit the verb to be. So his simply saying praefectus and so forth can mean we are the agents, we are the officers, and that's fine, because it's implied, it's understood, and it's entirely clear anyway. The only thing that would clarify this completely for me would be, is it praefectus singular or praefectus plural? Either way, it works just fine for me.
Atque adfero acerbum nuntium ad vos omnes.
Here he seems to make the only thing that most people would agree is definitely a mistake, where he says adfero instead of adfero. This is the penultimate stress rule, which I talked about here. Why is it adfero? Let's test your knowledge of the penultimate stress rule. The penultimate syllable, meaning the second to last syllable, is fe. And this syllable, is it long or short? How do we know? Well, it doesn't have a long vowel, and it doesn't end in a consonant. Therefore, it is a short syllable, and the stress will not fall here, but on the previous syllable. Adfero, adfero.
Atque adfero acerbum nuntium ad vos omnes.
Acerbum nuntium seems like a really interesting phrase, so I looked it up and found that indeed this is something actually written by Cicero.
Wow.
Acerbum nuntium, so it's attested even in ancient Latin. So this is definitely a good job by the translator.
Wow. Vos omnes. Morituri estis.
In addition to being good Latin, this is also definitely a reference to the famous line quoted by Suetonius, Ave imperator morituri te salutant, which is what some captives who were fated to die in a mock battle said to Emperor Claudius. Emperor Claudius responded, aut non.
Wow, you're so dominant.
Morituri is a future participle. We don't have this in English, but it's really cool in Latin because morituri suggests not merely the future, which is moriemini, which is what he could also say here, and it would work just fine, but he says morituri estis. You are about to die. You're going to die in a rather short period, whereas the regular future, moriemini, would be for a longer period of time. But that mountain, it's going to explode real soon.
Right on cue!
I'm not quite sure about the word that I transcribe here as passus.
Istemons, ignes, pastos per saecola in vos est vomiturus.
Istemons, ignes, passus, per saecula, in vos est vomiturus. So that mountain of yours, iste, that mountain of yours, or even this mountain, that mountain of yours has suffered fires for centuries. Ignes, passus, per saecula. I think this works very well. I'm not sure if it's the word passus, but it sounds close enough. In vos est vomiturus is going to spill all over you, the ignes, the fires. We modern folk understand volcanoes pretty well, thanks to geologists. So this phrase uses an important concept of Latinity, which is clarity over brevity. And even that said, it's difficult for people to understand this if they're not really familiar with what a volcano is, why it would erupt, etc. So no matter how well Loki might have described it, it's doubtful that the common folk of Pompeii would have understood or heeded his warning, which is what he's betting on.
Nothing matters!
Here we have a nice example of the accusative plus the infinitive.
Scio haec esse vera, quod ego de futuris ad veni.
Literally, this is, I know these things to be true. In English, we can do this, but in Romance languages, we can't. We'd have to say, I know that these things are true, with a finite verb instead of the infinitive verb. Classical Latin cannot do this. We have to say, I know these things to be true. Scio haec esse vera. But by the 4th and 5th century, as we see in the Vulgate Bible, this construction of the accusative plus the infinitive has essentially gone away and has been replaced by the form that we know very well from the Romance languages. In the Vulgate Bible, we would expect to see something like Scio quia haec sunt vera. I know because, or in this case, it now means that. I know that these things are true.
Scio haec esse vera, quod ego de futuris ad veni.
And he says that I have come from the futuris, which is exactly how we would say it today as modern speakers of Latin.
We are from the future, right? From the future. It's pretty future-y.
This sentence is excellently translated, of course. The concept itself is alien to the listeners, so there's no way for them to understand, no matter how good Loki's Latin is. And I think it's pretty good.
Wow.
More than that, the great Tom Hiddleston isn't just any old actor. He is a classically trained actor and in the classics themselves.
A classically trained actor, classically educated, went to Cambridge University.
Yes, it did, yeah.
Not only does he speak many modern languages, but also he can read Latin and Greek with a great deal of fluency. And this shows in his performance. Naturally, he has an accent. I doubt that Tom Hiddleston speaks Latin as frequently as I or other people in our community do, but the way he delivers the lines demonstrates that he knows the language really well. Everything he says is perfectly understandable to me as a speaker of Latin and doesn't confuse me at all. His intonation, the words that are emphasized, everything makes perfect sense. So yes, he has a little bit of a British accent, which is fine, especially for the character himself. What he's saying makes sense, it's clear, it's fantastic. So we have excellent translation, we have excellent performance. What more could you ask for in the world of entertainment?
Oh man, I feel like, wow. I genuinely loved reading the Odyssey and the Iliad, Plato in the original Greek. It's like reading, wow.
Hold on.
So the guy knows Latin and Greek well enough to appreciate reading it in the original. This is exactly what all of us who speak and read Latin emphasize. Why is it so interesting to speak the languages? Why is it so important to read to fluency? Because then you can appreciate some of the most amazing works that have ever been created. Translation just doesn't cut it, and he makes this point.
People read it not in the original Greek, you go, you're not really getting it.
You just don't get the...
Is it really?
Translation, which is a way to access it, just isn't the same thing.
I've heard it described that reading a great work of art, not in the original language, reading a translation is like kissing a woman through a veil.
Of course, in the years 2020 and 2021, there may have been occasion for some of us to kiss someone through a veil.
Who wants to do that?
Not me.
Not me.
I'd say it's worth it. Fine mujus pelliculae facturus vos saluto. If you're interested in Latin and ancient Greek, check out my huge collection of the audiobooks I record for my patrons on Patreon.
Wow.
As well as my audiobook store at lukeranieri.com.
Wow. Wow. Wow.